Hello, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the September edition of the Being Well Together webinar series. This afternoon's session is entitled Creative Approaches to Common Wellbeing Challenges in the Workplace. And whilst we allow everybody to join this meeting, we're just going to play you a short video which will give you some information on the well-being side of the British Safety Council business. So we'll just play that now and I'll see you at the end of it. Welcome back, everyone. I'd now like to kick off the webinar by introducing our two guest speakers. First of all, we have Fiona McCaslin. Fiona is Head of Health and Wellbeing at Royal Mail. Fiona is responsible for setting the long-term wellbeing strategy for over 135,000 people, as well as the day-to-day delivery of the group's wellbeing plan. Fiona's career includes over 25 years of varied HR experience across a number of organisations, covering most HR disciplines. Fiona's passion lies in helping people bring the best of themselves to work by actively designing a personalised, proactive wellbeing proposition and promoting a positive wellbeing culture. Our second guest speaker is Emma Willey, Managing Director at ACS Learning and Consultancy. Emma has been part of the health and safety industry for 3 decades and is a founding director of the ACS group. Starting out in asbestos testing industry, she has sweated in enclosures, crawled through ducts full of PPE, peered down microscopes, trained, audited and consulted in residential, commercial and complex industry settings. In 2004, on their honeymoon in Thailand, Emma and her husband narrowly survived the Boxing Day tsunami. Whilst physically well, she developed PTSD as a result of the experience. It was a personal road to recovery that spurred her interest in well-being. Once recovered, Emma began helping other survivors of trauma with a combined complementary therapy system, which she still practices today. She has evolved the skills learned from these deeply personal experiences into a drive for practical and effective change in the workplace well-being scenario. Emma is a strong advocate for solid procedures and processes within the working environment that deal with the welfare of staff. She believes well-being cannot just be about helping traumatized or struggling employees, nor about fruit on Fridays or free yoga classes. For Emma, truly improving modern professional well-being is about a fundamental shift in the outlook of health and safety in the workplace. It's about change in how we view our working lives, so that our commitment to well-being is genuine and focused, rather than a vague box-ticking exercise. It includes raising the profile of the subject and its practitioners, but it's not a poor cousin to other business pressures. Finally, last but by no means least, I'd like to introduce Marcus Herbert, our Head of Wellbeing here at British Safety Council. Marcus has over 15 years experience and 2 degrees in the wellbeing industry. He's worked with industry elites, including athletes and executives, on enhancing their own personal well-being and reducing their risk of lifestyle diseases through effective behaviour change strategies. Transferring this experience into the corporate setting, Marcus has worked with organisations from micro to global on their approach to organisational well-being and how to develop an effective and meaningful well-being strategy. More recently, Marcus has developed training courses to support directors, line managers, and employees on the most effective ways to embrace health and well-being at work. I'll now hand over to Marcus, who will kick off today's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for the intros there, David, much appreciated. And yeah, thank you for everybody joining us. And most importantly, thank you so much to Fiona and Emma for participating in today's session. For anybody that has attended these sessions before, you'll know that at the moment, one of our objectives is sharing experiences and best practice across well-being across all organisation sectors, sizes. And normally we have more of a webinar presentation delivery, whereas today we wanted to structure our conversation more as a panel back and forth. So we've got some questions that have been prepared for Fiona and Emma, and of course, you know, we have set questions, but they could quite easily go off on various mini little tangents as well. I'm sure that everybody attending this session is as interested in workplace wellbeing as the three of us in this panel at the moment. If whilst during the session, if you have any questions you would like to ask to Fiona or Emma or myself, there is a question function in GoToWebinar. You can just pop your question in there, and then when we come towards the end of the session, we'll be able to review any of those questions that have come through. So without further ado, let's get on to the questions. Now, obviously, we've had you know, the biographies of both Fiona and Emma, but actually the first question I'd like to hear your responses to is actually just to paint the picture a little bit for the audience. Tell us a bit more about your organisation, so the kind of sector that it's in, the size, the main purpose of it, and then what your role is within the organisation. And I'll ask that question first of all to Fiona.
Yeah, hi and good afternoon, everyone. Lovely to be with you this afternoon. Yeah, so I'm Fiona McCausland. I'm Head of Health and Wellbeing for Royal Mail. I've been at Royal Mail just coming up a year now, actually. I think it was the 3rd of October last year that I joined. Previously to that, I was at NatWest for around about 18, 19 years and led their wellbeing proposition for the last 7 or 8. So joined Royal Mail last year. I mean, I guess everybody knows Royal Mail. It's obviously a very much trusted part of our community. We have around about 135,000 people in that kind of transport and logistics industry. And yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, you know, it's been a challenging time. We've obviously come out of COVID, as everybody else has. Royal Mail were frontline key workers during that period of time, and as you'll be well aware from the media, that Royal Mail has also been going through industrial action over the last 12 months as well. So our people have been through a lot over the last few years. So well-being has certainly, I would say, moved right to the top of the agenda for a number of reasons. And it's certainly a priority for us going forward. So yeah, it'd be great to share some of those experiences today, Marcus, as well as we go through the questions.
Thanks, Fiona, and Emma, same to you.
Hello everyone, my name's Emma. I am completely the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of staff levels. 135,000 staff. I think I'd rather, I don't know, shoot myself. We have between 20 and 30 staff, depending on what sort of projects we've got going on, what's going on in the workplace and with our clients. We're a health and safety consultancy company, consultancy and training. We specialise in asbestos and fire risk management, so very much aimed at the technical side of it. So we're UCAS accredited, so we do the surveying, the testing, we've got the lab, all that sort of stuff, if you want to call it that. In terms of sort of what else we do, it's a huge industry. It's a lot of different challenges come. I'm the managing director now of ACS. And I'm the first female MD, so that's quite an interesting time for us, it really is, particularly because traditionally our industry is absolutely male dominated. So it's a really interesting time for us, it's a really interesting time for some of my staff. Some of the changes just by having, I didn't think it would make that much of a difference, but apparently it does. Having a female sort of making the final decisions, so that has been really interesting and absolutely has led into some interesting well-being spirals that I wasn't expecting to have to deal with in the year 2023, but we do. So it's been really, and I love it. I absolutely love it.
Yeah, thank you, Emma. So what I'm actually going to do now is with the next question, I'm going to stick with you, Emma, because you've mentioned a couple of things there as well within your intro that we could quite easily open up into all sorts of interesting tangents. But one thing I'd like to understand is, and I'm sure many people that are attending this session today are also wondering, why is it that well-being is so important to your organisation?
Right, I could talk about this for hours. So if I talk too much, Marcus, just butt in. Okay, I will not be offended. It's for me, I cannot even say how passionate I am about it. Normally, if I'm talking, I have to have slides because I talk about it forever. As it was mentioned earlier on, my husband and I are survivors of the 2004 Boxing Day tsunami. And when we came back from that, I was a mess, physically fine, absolutely fine, but had post-traumatic stress disorder. And of course, in those days, this is almost 20 years ago, so people didn't have PTSD. We didn't know what it was. At best, if you were in the armed forces and had seen active combat, then you would have shell shock. It was really not known about. And I tried really hard to come back to work, and I just couldn't. I was standing at the photocopier in Glasgow, where it's always cold and wet, and I was feeling the heat from the sun. I was hearing, I was absolutely reliving that experience. And having been in work in a position of responsibility and being very, very, very unwell was a quite awful experience, to be honest. And it was literally just carving my way through that, which took a long, long time. And then when I did get well enough to come back to work, having to explain to people, I'm well and I'm here, but I'm still not right. There's some things not right. So that is so deeply personal to me. And then once I had recovered, recognizing you don't just get PTSD from really massive traumatic experiences like that. There can be all sorts of different triggers. We had people who are primary carers in their home life, in their spare time. So really, that's what started it, was my own recovery, but then recognizing there are so many people who need that support at work and just need someone to understand, okay, yes, you are competent. It might be that you're far more than competent. You're very good. You just need that bit of support and understanding. And in a nutshell, that's where it comes from.
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredible reason that well-being is important to an individual, and I think it's very rare within our industry for somebody to have not only experienced that, but also survived such a situation. But then also connecting the dots between somebody going through something outside of work that is then having an impact on them when they're in work. So, really interesting. And obviously, don't worry, we'll be delving into some more of the questions and the routes into successes that you found and lessons that you've learned as we go through the questions. But Fiona, same question to you. Obviously, workplace wellbeing is clearly of importance to you. It's the career path that you've chosen. You've gone into potentially a difficult situation as well with the change in role. So why is well-being important to you and to your new organisation?
Yeah, and it's a really good question, Marcus. So I think for me, it's important to me because I've worked in this, as they say, in this industry for a while now, and I can see the difference it makes. So if I think back to my time at NatWest, we started at a certain, really from a sort of blank piece of paper right through to a position where actually people felt really supported, well-being was very highly regarded. It was making a big difference in the organisation. So I've seen firsthand when well-being is done well and people engage with it and the difference it can make. So I guess coming into a new role, and you're right, it's a challenging role, it's a challenging time for us at the moment for a number of reasons. And I think it's important because everyone's been through the pandemic. Everybody's got different things going on in their lives, and I think that's what the pandemic really showed us, that actually that kind of one size fits all well-being isn't really fit for purpose anymore. So the influence that we can have on our people and to share what support's out there and make sure that it's fit for purpose for everybody is huge. So I think the difference wellbeing can make is massive just now. You know, supporting colleagues, supporting managers, getting an ambassador network. I know we'll talk about that in a little while, but yeah, the impact it can have can be really crucial to any organisation, no matter what size it is.
Thank you very much, Fiona. So what I'm going to do now is stick with you for this next question. And obviously you've actually touched a little bit on there. You mentioned, you know, your previous position within NatWest. So prior to, you know, being with Royal Mail now, can you tell us a bit more about the overall journey of your previous experience with specifically workplace wellbeing?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I say, I worked at NatWest for a long period of time, and I did fall into wellbeing. So it wasn't actually a sort of deliberate path that I chose. It just so happened I was working in a team that had wellbeing in it. I ended up working on a project in there and just immediately saw kind of the difference it can make. So, and that took me down a path that I probably, if we'd been sitting here 10 years ago, I would never have believed would have gone on. So I ended up in a team sort of running the wellbeing agenda. And as I say, it was a bit of a blank piece of paper. And I think for organisations, quite often that's where wellbeing starts. You don't really know where to start. So for us, it was understanding using data. So I'm a massive advocate for data. You know, what is it telling us? So you know, listen to your people. Do you have listening groups? You know, your employee opinion survey. We introduced what we called a wellbeing index, which we've just introduced into Royal Mail as well, which gives you a real deep insight into some of those topics and areas that actually are important to people. So once you start to understand the areas of focus, then you can start to build on them. And for us, it was definitely across 4 pillars, which will be very familiar to many people. So kind of, you know, the physical health, the mental health, financial well-being and social well-being. So social well-being being that piece around what are those things in our lives that make a difference. And again, I think the pandemic really brought this to life for us. So that whole importance of being connected to people, I don't think we really understood it as much as we do now. You know, the way that we work, flexible working, volunteering, community work, all those things are really important. So yeah, in terms of NatWest, we did a lot of that kind of soul searching, I suppose, you know, and understanding what was important to people, and then starting to put a real core foundation down. So I'm a firm believer that, and it's exactly what Emma was saying, you know, you could throw a lot of things in the wellbeing space, if it's Fruit Fridays or yoga class, whatever it is, they're not going to touch the sides if you really want to make a difference in the wellbeing space. So having a real core foundation of support and resources that people can access, and then you can start to personalize the services as you go along. So our journey in NatWest started with that sort of core proposition, and then, you know, by the time I left, certainly we were looking at that more segmented, personalised approach, which is something we're taking into Royal Mail as well.
Thanks, Fiona. And there's a couple of things you've touched on there, primarily around, you know, using data. You know, that's something that we'll never disagree on, and the value of using data. And we're actually going to drill down to that a little bit more detail as we go through this panel discussion. But before we get to that, same thing to you, Emma. Obviously, you've had your own, you know, extensive personal experience with well-being. But when it comes to workplace well-being, you know, can you tell us a little bit more about your kind of experience to date?
Yeah, my experience is really different to Fiona's in terms of it all being hands-on and not knowing up from down and literally trial and error. So it's been, we don't call it mistakes, we call them very steep learning curves. So there have been a lot of those. But it was all led by the team that we had. So obviously I was part of that team and I was having issues. But then there would be the very first one that I remember, and it was the one that triggered me to think, oh, hang on, there's something more that I should be doing here. And it was a conversation, just chatting to someone who was primary carer for a mum with dementia at home. So coming to work, doing their normal, quite stressful, strenuous work day with a lot of pressure and expectation, and then going home to be a primary carer. So that is sort of where it came. So we went through that, and we navigated that together. That flexible working was not a thing. So when I said, well, do you want to change your hours? Would that be easier? And you start earlier because of the medication. She was sleeping a lot in the morning. So I said, well, do you want to just come in? And the shock on that person's face, just saying, well, can we do that? You know, nowadays, of course, you expect that from an employer, whereas, you know, nigh on, what's that, 18, 19 years ago, that was not an expectation at all. So it was everything that I did at first was literally through experience. And then bereavement leave, you know, and talking to people, how do they deal with that? It's not just about somebody passes away and then you've got 2 weeks till the funeral, and, you know, I've got a funeral myself tomorrow, a family one. So the impact on you is much, much greater. But again, literally from listening to and talking to my staff, talking to colleagues, neurodiversity, that was quite a big whack in the face if you've never experienced that before in the workplace, because it's really different dealing with it. And of course, you've got the HR bit of your head saying you've got to treat everybody the same. And then you're thinking, but the people are not the same. They've got really different needs, really different needs. So that's, and of course now we've got menopause. That's a massive thing, which is why I have notes everywhere at the moment. So we write it down or it's not going to happen. So there's all these different but deeply personal experiences. So I didn't have things written down, and I didn't have processes or procedures in the early days, and gosh, I wish I had. So I would say it took me till about 2015 really to actually start looking at proper concrete data, and all of the things we now know because of talking to people like you two on the screen and saying, oh right, oh yeah, we should measure that, shouldn't we? How do we measure that? What questions do we ask? Who do we ask those questions to? But that was much, much later on in our journey, and led to a lot of very painful issues. My HR chap, the big chief in charge, he just looks at me sometimes and he can tell on my face, and you would see it say, oh, what have you done? And then sit me down and say, right, don't do that again. This is how you will do it. You will have a process and a procedure. Okay, I'll do that next time. So
it sounds like you've had quite a discovery period over those years, and it sounds like you've reached a point of a higher level of maturity in workplace well-being, but it also sounds like you're still learning new things and developing new processes and policies based on your current experience. So one of the questions I wanted to ask was, you actually touched on a couple of these, was that what approaches to workplace well-being have you actually found real success in, whether it be with your current position in your current organization, or whether it be with others? Are there any particular approaches to workplace well-being that you found success?
Is it still me?
Sorry, to Emma. Yeah, to Emma. Yeah.
I think the absolute key for me and the biggest learning curve was communication, because on the biggest disasters we have had, or I have had, is when that communication has gone wrong. So there's lots of other things, but I think for me it's about explaining why are we doing this. And I always start with that now. When we get new people, recruits, this is what we do for wellbeing. This is why we do it. And explaining sort of the background. Why are we even looking at this? What's important to us as an organisation? Absolutely, that has been key. Probably the biggest key. At the end of the day, I think particularly Fiona said earlier about the difference between the workplace pre-COVID and post-COVID, and they're not comparable, are they? They're really, really not comparable. So if you don't have that, what we're looking at and what we've been dealing with since COVID is change management. And COVID has been the biggest single change to our working practices since the Second World War. So it's a huge amount of change so quickly, and if you don't employ the principles of change management, then it really will you will come a cropper. So for me, the biggest thing about that is the communication. Why are you doing it? What do you want to achieve? And all that, and getting the buy-in as well. If you don't have the buy-in from the people, there's no point. Absolutely no point.
It's really interesting because quite often, individuals, organizations are looking for what's the next best well-being initiative or intervention that we need to roll out. Whereas actually what you've highlighted there is that where you found success is actually when you've reviewed what communication channels work best for your beneficiaries, for your organization. That's really interesting. So same again across to Fiona, obviously, experience in different organizations, different time spent with the two, key organizations. But have you found that there's certain approaches that have worked for you in finding success in workplace wellbeing in the past?
Yeah, definitely, and would absolutely echo what Emma just said there about communication. So it is the key to any sort of successful wellbeing strategy. And depending on the size of your organisation, if you might have comms as part of your role, or you might have a comms partner, they become your best friends. So I would say definitely make sure that you're linked in with your comms people. Comms can be a challenge. So if I think about back to NatWest, it was fairly simple. People tended to be easy to access. They're either working behind a computer screen, or they're in branches, etc. It was relatively easy. Royal Mail is a different beast. 90,000 people are out on the street every day. Not easy to access. So understanding those communication routes can make a huge success of your wellbeing strategy. So I think that was a really good point Emma made there. Yeah, I think a couple of other things to mention. So data we've talked about already. So I think again that is a huge catalyst to being successful. So not only kind of that internal understanding what your people think. So employee listening groups, focus groups can't emphasize enough just how successful they can be. But also your wellbeing partners. So if you do have suppliers that are out there, then make sure you're getting really good MI, and don't just, I would say, don't just accept the MI or basic data that you get. What you really want is the insight. So I'm no expert in workplace wellbeing, which is why we engage with wellbeing partners, and that's I really thrive from getting those insights. What is it really telling us? Because that then helps those discussions at kind of a board and senior level as well. And the other thing that's hugely successful, and again, it doesn't matter what size of organization you have, but some champion ambassador type programs. So if you're anything like our team, we're really small, for 135,000 people, there are 3 of us. And so it's a tall, tough challenge to roll out a wellbeing program to that number of people, but it's doable. And I would say a key part of that is having a really robust champion program. So I would call them the army on the ground, that are your extended family. So they are the people who can, you set the agenda, you set the direction. They don't have to do the developing of it, but they're the activists in the case. So they're the ones who are on the ground in the team. So having a really good ambassador program. This year we had 300 when I started. I think we're just about 1,100 across the group. So we've still got a long way to go, but we've really grown, and they make a massive difference. And then the final thing I would say on that successful, and it is the extended family, as I will call it again, is our suppliers that I talked about there. So yes, they are an extension of your team, and being experts in that field, but you also want them working together as well. So having everybody kind of siloed with their own little area of expertise is good, but it's not as effective as it can be. So what was really successful for us in NatWest, and we're about to do it in Royal Mail, is a supplier partner forum where you get everyone together around the table, set some challenges. What are your problems? What are the things that actually you might be struggling with? and set that as a challenge to the people around the table, and it'll be amazing what sort of things you'll start to see coming up. So yeah, I would say some really sort of practical things can help make success of any well-being sort of proposition.
It's really interesting. You know, capturing information from all sources of audiences, and then funneling it through your team. Sounds like that's been, you know, very beneficial for you. But I'm wondering, Fiona, from, you know, your past experience, have you ever been put kind of under pressure to evidence success of your wellbeing programs or initiatives? Have you ever been asked to benchmark your data or prove that something has worked? Or have you generally had buy-in and kind of trust that things will work out in the end? What's been your kind of experience with data?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. So my experience is mixed, I would say. So I think pre-pandemic, let's be honest, I think well-being was seen as a bit of a nice to do, a bit of an add-on. It was something that was there. People said, yeah, it's good, but it's a bit woolly, dare I say that? You know, I think that's where people felt. So it was kind of left to its own devices. COVID happened, and poof, it shot to the top of the list, and it was the most important thing. And I think somebody said around about that time, you know, if you absolutely need to put your people at the top of your list every single morning, and that was a big game changer for us. So again, even at that point, people were not looking for evidence or measurement particularly, because it was boom, 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 we just needed to do it. But what it did do was it showed just the impact that well-being can have in a corporate strategy, which was, I mean, it's the best thing that could have happened through all the awfulness of COVID relate for us. I think what I'm finding now is, you know, cash is tight everywhere. So, you know, you do have to be quite sensible, and you do have to be able to show the evidence of what you're doing. And, you know, we're in a fortunate position in the wellbeing industry just now, is that we've got you know, suppliers and partners out there who have done amazing work around you know, return on investment calculator. So you can quite simply put some of your data in, and you'll get that information back out. Deloitte have done a brilliant one, and there's others that are out there as well. So I think certainly when I'm putting a proposal to our board together now, I'm certainly having to say, and this is where we're going to measure it. You know, so there'll be an element of employee listening, feedback, the wellbeing index that I talked about, and the employee opinion survey is a great mechanism for doing it. But you do need to kind of show that investment, that return on investment as well. And it's not easy to do in the wellbeing space, but there are tools out there that can help with it.
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. And directing that question, but in a slightly different format, to Emma, because obviously, Emma, being in your position, you may not have to be the one, you know, outlining where success has been found. But do you use any kind of benchmark data, or using any form of data to show impact of things that you've done over the years? Or is it, again, a process of, you know, that it's meaningful, and actually it doesn't matter what the data's saying, we need to roll something out for the benefit of the staff? You know, what's your kind of position on it?
I am all for data, all for it. And again, partly from having come at it an introductory angle of not using data. So having got much egg on my face, and the first time I thought to use data was I'd come back from maternity leave, and I had quite a long time off, and I walked in, and we've all had this, you walk into an office and you think, oh, that's not a nice atmosphere, what's going on here? And there was a particular, well, team in inverted commas, and they were most certainly, they were a group of people working on the same task. They were not a team. And that was the first thing I tackled, because I thought, well, I work really hard, I work really long hours, I don't want to sit with this atmosphere, thanks very much. So that was my very first, literally the first day. So I got called into the then MD's office to say, what are you doing? But it didn't take that long, because again, even in big organizations, I'm noticing the actual working team tends to be quite small, because as a species, we don't work so great after you get above kind of 15 people. We're better with the smaller groups. So basically, I did a whole load of tasks, tasks and got them to work together. We changed working practices and they became a team. And the other directors had been very skeptical about what I was doing. So when I went back and I said, look at this, we've spent this amount on recruitment over the last so many months, years, and look how much we've spent since I started doing this. And the answer was not one penny, which will probably fill recruiters with horror, but it's one thing to be growing your business and deliberately spending money on recruitment is quite another if you're spending a lot of money on recruitment fees simply to replace jobs that actually don't need to be replaced because the people are competent or good even. You know, you don't want to be spending money on that. So that was the very, very first data that I looked at, and it was a stark difference. And that's what made me think, oh, well, what else can we look at? So absolutely, I think if you are looking at well-being in your organisation without also looking at the data, then you need to change how you're looking at well-being. It is as simple as that, because otherwise you're just in the kind of fluffy bit. And the fluffy bit is good, but the fluffy bit should be the cherry on the top of the cake, not the whole ingredients.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Emma. And it's I think, again, it's interesting to hear kind of different perspectives, but with similar outcomes. And, you know, also difference in KPIs of the positions of both Fiona and Emma, but again, identifying that actually using the right data aligned to the right, you know, interventions or changes within a workplace result in positive business outcomes. And it is interesting that there is now more of a shift in the kind of what have you done for me lately when it comes to workplace well-being. And so more often than not, we like to share success. We like to talk about where people have done something that has produced positive outcomes. But very seldom do we talk about where people have tried something and it actually didn't work. So one of the hard-hitting questions for today, directed to Emma to start off with, is what, if any, approaches to workplace well-being have you tried, and then for you, maybe it failed or it didn't work, or in your vocabulary, it wouldn't be classed as a mistake. It would be a steep learning curve. What would those approaches to workplace well-being that haven't worked be?
I have many of those, many stories of that, Marcus. Yes, so not just, we have the expression, oh, I've had egg on my face. I've been the center of that omelette. I really have. So I think the biggest takeaway was bounding, and I see, maybe it's an age thing, I see some of my younger staff doing them. I literally grabbed one the other day to say, stop, instantly stop, don't do this. When you bound in with that enthusiasm, and you are only seeing your side of the story. So you go in and you start telling people, you've got to do this. This is going to work. It's going to change our lives. It's going to do this, that, and the other. So you tell people instead of listening and asking their opinion, first of all, which can be a really hard thing to do when you know that what you're going to do is have such a positive outcome. But then you have to take that deep breath and stand back and say, right, have you got some time to talk about whatever it is? Because I've got some ideas, and of course the particular, I'm quite a passionate person. If I really believe in something, I want to go and do it now. Thank you very much. And I would say that time again, when I've made the clangers of mistakes, where you just go home and you think, I can't believe I did that. I don't want to go to work tomorrow. I was so embarrassed. Those ones. And every single one can be traced back to telling people and not listening. Not asking their opinions, not listening to their whys. I was exchanging this story with a friend of mine who's a teacher, and she just rolled her eyes and she said, don't worry about it, Emma. Our head teacher got absolutely carried away and decided we all had to do healthy eating, so brought all the fruit in. And then by Monday, we have a massive fruit fly infestation because nobody wanted, because we all bring our own packed lunch, and then we had to get pest control and all that. So again, I think every single thing I've done, and I'm willing to share, but because of time, you probably don't want to hear them all. But every single one I can trace back to telling people, not communicating with and listening to people. You must listen to that feedback, even if you disagree, and then give that answer back as, I disagree because of. Well, then you're in communication, aren't you? You're talking to people and they feel heard. So even if they come, I mean, quite often, particularly in my case, I'll put my case forward and then they'll say, well, okay, I disagree, but you can try it and let's see what the outcome is. And then we have to go back to the whole data and see where has it worked and has it not. But definitely communication. Don't tell people what to do. Nobody likes it. From toddlers to geriatrics, nobody likes being told. So
yeah, I can definitely back up and vouch for that. Toddlers don't like to be told what to do as well, now that I have 3 of them.
yeah.
Okay, so same question across to Fiona. Within your approaches that you've tried with workplace wellbeing, are there any that you have found that didn't work for you? Any similarities to Emma's?
Yeah, huge similarity to Emma. So what you're describing is for us kind of that parent-child communication that I've certainly seen over the years, and it's not where you want well-being to be. You want, the whole employee value proposition. You want this contract between you as an organization and individuals that you're going to give something, but they're going to give something back, and it needs to be a partnership. So that kind of, you should do this, definitely doesn't work from my experience, and we've done that many times. So I'm certainly finding that tone of voice in the communications is really, really important. We're having to do quite a lot of work on that, certainly at the moment as well. I think some of the other things are absorbability. So I've made the mistake in the past, maybe still doing it, think, well, well-being is clearly the most important thing in this whole organization at this time and should take priority over everything, and launching something without considering the absorbability from managers or colleagues, and a key time for us in Royal Mail is what we call peak time, so which we're about to come into the run up to Christmas. So for us to launch something in the next 3 months would fall a death, so we just need to be very mindful, and I have fallen into that trap in the past as well. And I think the final thing is people coming a little bit overwhelmed. I think you mentioned it earlier, Marcus, around what's the shiny new thing that we want to put into the wellbeing space and keep throwing it in. And COVID was a bad example of that. I mean, we just kept throwing more and more things in because that's what we felt was the right thing. What happened was that everybody just got completely overwhelmed with the volume of information that was out there. So there comes a point, I think, and there have been some recent studies, and forgive me, I can't remember who it was that did it recently, but there was a study on that said, yeah, you'll get positive benefit up until this point, and then no matter how much you throw in the mix, nothing will happen. So finding that sweet spot of where you kind of need to stop the new initiatives and embed properly what you've already got is a real key learning for me as well over the years.
Thanks, Fiona. So interestingly, some of the stuff you've spoken about there actually leads me into our penultimate question, which is, for you and in your organisation at the moment, what are the next steps for workplace wellbeing?
Where to start? So we've got some key ones. Mental health is a massive issue for us at the moment. So it's one of our top reasons for absence. So we are about to be embarking on a new mental health programme, which will be over the next sort of 12 to 24 months, which will focus around support for colleagues, we have workplace coaches, ambassadors, our managers. We haven't really talked about managers today, but such a key population that you kind of need to put your arms around them first, that oxygen mask on analogy. We're definitely in that position just now. So there's a lot of work we need to do in that space. Musculoskeletal support, again, unsurprisingly, probably for Royal Mail, as you would expect, is particularly high. So we need to make sure that we're fully supporting our people as well. And then the other piece that we're focusing on is around what I would call kind of those moments that matter. So those moments where somebody sits down in front of you or sits down as if maybe part of your team, tells you something and you kind of go, oh, I don't know what to do here. It's a really unusual situation, or, you know, it's a difficult situation. You know, making sure we have the right support. You know, examples, I think, Emma, you mentioned it earlier, you know, sort of bereavement, you know, losing a baby, for example, you know, relationship separation, reproductive health, all of those kind of more difficult subjects that we don't particularly talk about. We need to do quite a bit of work in that space. So yeah, the list is endless, but we are prioritizing probably 2 or 3 big things.
Yeah, the well-being needs of the workforce will never end, unfortunately.
Indeed.
So thanks, Fiona. And then Emma, to yourself as well, what's the next steps for workplace well-being for you?
Actually, I'm loving the next steps. We recently got, I know it's not you, Marcus, it's the Being Well Together group. So we've had some interaction with those, and they've gone, because we're a small team, sometimes if somebody raises an issue, even if they try and anonymize it, just the way the tone of I know who said that. So, and the staff know that I know they said that. So we deliberately went external for that, because I really wanted the staff to be able to have their own voice. So I get my feedback next month, I believe it is, which will be interesting. But I know already where I want to take us is similar in a funny way to Fiona, even though she's so much bigger than us. I'm calling it mentoring teams, because in terms of training the staff how to do their job, we're exceptionally good at that. We've done it for a long time. And also it's quite a process. You know, learn this, have a test, have an exam, pass it, tick box. Whereas the softer skills, which I think are becoming more and more important, that's where we need to focus on. And that you can't have a course for that. You need to just sit and have a cup of tea with someone who's been there, done that, got many, many t-shirts, and say, like me grabbing that colleague the other day, and I just said to her, I said, don't do that. We need to sit and have a chat. And she looked at me as if I was mad, and I said, we need a cup of tea, and I'm about to save you 3 years of angst. So, and then I just went through my own stories of how I tried what she was about to do, where it had gone wrong, why it had gone wrong. We probably spent about 45 minutes having a chat. And to me, that's mentoring. You know, I don't need to send the staff on training courses. They've have, or if I do, I know what ones to go to. Whereas that mentoring, I think Fiona said, it's about putting your arm around people, whether they're managers or going to become managers, and saying, no, don't do that. Try this instead, and having that conversation, and then seeing where that skills gap is. But confidence is a real one that we need to look at. I think I'm seeing that across all the industries that we work in. And I'm assuming that is part of the whole COVID, sort of long-term COVID effects. So just that's where the mentoring comes in. It's holding people's hands and saying, come on, let's do this together, and definitely teamwork. So.
Thank you very much. And as we're moving now into the final question, actually some of the things you're talking about there, Emma, is leading us into that. So what I'm going to do is just share my screen. So hopefully that will be loading for everybody shortly. I'll just let that go to full screen. And so the final question is, you know, people attending these sessions, we hope are people in positions where they're interested in workplace wellbeing, and maybe they have some level of responsibility or influence over workplace wellbeing. So Emma, if you could just close us out from your perspective on the top 3 things that you would recommend to others to set themselves up for workplace wellbeing success.
These are my top 3, so definitely get the buy-in. If you are in an organisation where people are just putting the cherries on the top, if that's how you want to work, fine. But if you don't have buy-in from the top, this won't happen. Nothing will change, and it is as simple as that. So that's my first one is make sure you've got buy-in from your senior management. Definitely involve all the staff, however you do that. Whether we're not big enough to have ambassadors, so we need to be able to make sure that we've got safe spaces so you can talk to somebody and even right up to MD level. So someone who's the most junior, newest member of staff can go and say, that Emma's a lunatic. We need to change this. How do we say that to her? And feedback loops. There's a lot of communication from the top down. How do you ensure you're hearing what's coming from the grassroots? How do you do that? And how do you mix up the groups? So how do you make sure admin is talking to the lab, is talking to all these other bits? Definitely support for yourself. Definitely put that in, because the number of people I speak to who are involved in wellbeing, but they are like the only person doing it. And Fiona said that she's got, what, 135,000 staff and there's 3 of them. That can be really, really lonely. So make sure, and for me, there's just me. So it can be, so get some support for yourself, because if you break, the whole thing will fall down. And also time, however long you think you're going to need, at least treble it. I thought when we started this back in 2015, I thought, oh, a year maximum, and we're still going. And I now know this is a never-ending process, and it's great. I love it, but this is change management. If you're doing it properly, then you need the data, proper change management, proper communication channels. It takes time. You cannot wave a wand and do it quickly.
Great, thank you very much, Emma. And then over to Fiona as well for your top 3 things for those attendees.
Yeah, so you invest, if you're big enough, invest in wellbeing champions or ambassadors. As I say, they're your extended family, your army on the ground, and can really help you in your role. We talked a lot about data today. It's absolutely key. So whether it's even a small bit of data that you've got, it just helps reinforce your business case, helps you measure. It's just, real valuable information for you. And then that final piece is, connect your wellbeing partners. If you are working with people, bring them together. Don't work with them on a silo basis. As I say, they are your extended team as well.
Thank you so much, both Fiona and Emma. We'll be coming on to questions from the attendees shortly. Also, just a quick note to apologise that I should have known better than planning a session for 45 minutes when we have a Welsh person and 2 Scottish people in the conversation. Poor planning from my perspective. But for those of you that are still with us, I can see that the vast majority are. As you've attended this session today, as usual, we provide these sessions from British Safety Council for free, hopefully to be able to make a difference in workplace wellbeing. If after attending today's session you would like to have a conversation with us, then you can scan the QR code on screen, or you can just take a note of the details on screen as well. And of course, look out for our next workplace wellbeing webinar. We'll be covering again topics relevant to this area. So I'd like to invite David back, just in case we've had any questions from the attendees before we wrap up before the close of the hour.
Yes, thanks, Marcus. Before I dig into the questions, of which there are many, I'd just like to pay tribute to this panel. I thought that was a fantastic session, really engaging, practical, and at times personal. Which really helps people navigate their journey on this particular area. So thank you so much to Fiona, Emma, and obviously you, Marcus, for taking part in this. I'll dig into some of the questions, conscious we've got very little time and we have already run over. There's a lot of specific questions, but here's one that I've highlighted. There's a question for Fiona, actually. We've touched on it, but the question is from Samantha O'Driscoll. Working in such a large, varied organisation, particularly as you mentioned with remote workers, how does the organisation allow wellbeing initiatives to be taken up by all staff, regardless of work patterns and location?
Yeah, it's a really good point. Hi, Samantha. Thank you for your question. So I guess this is where your ambassadors come in. So what we tend to do is that we will have a group initiative. But what we do is we work with our ambassadors to make sure that actually when we roll something out, or we for example, World Mental Health Day is coming up, it's probably a good example. We have certain things that we're going to do at a group level, but then we work with our ambassadors in each of those different areas to say, actually, what's going to work for you? So you end up with that kind of segmented approach that sits underneath it. So almost here's the group level, but here's some different examples of things that you can do. one of the things that I've done in the past is set up almost like a best practice site. We've got a wellbeing hub, which we haven't really talked about, but we launched a few months ago. And in there, you know, a best practice site that actually, if you are remote working, here's some examples of things you can do. And a good example would be, we have just sent out to all of our sites, you know, a wellbeing notice board in a box. Sounds really simple, but if you can imagine Royal Mail centres, you know, very practical, very visual. But to your point, we've got a lot of people who are sitting, you know, working from home or remotely. So we've replicated that onto Teams, and we have, you know, notice board, a virtual notice board. So it's just thinking about your different audiences and tailoring your solution so it works for them. It just takes a little bit more thought, but I think your ambassadors are brilliant at helping at that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Fiona. I've got one more question, which will go to Emma. And this is Emma, it's from Simon. Do you have an advantage with being able to deal with each wellbeing related issue on a very individual basis compared to Fiona, who I guess can't be so adaptive and bespoke to each person's need? And does a small business make it easier to communicate and engage with staff about well-being compared with 135,000 people to address? Juxtaposition from the previous question, I guess.
Oh, that's one that makes you think, isn't it? Thank you for that, Simon. I tend to not think of it as more or less difficult. It's really, really different. And sometimes it's so different you can't really compare. I think the pitfalls, oh, I don't know who that was. The pitfalls of being responsible yourself and having such a small team is that if you get it wrong, everybody knows within half an hour, and it really has an immediate negative ripple effect on the rest of the team. So that's absolutely a pitfall of doing it. But also, you know, we're small. I think, what are we, about 20 staff at the moment? Out of those 20 staff, not all 20 want to talk to me. We had some older gentlemen with some prostate issues, and they absolutely did not want to talk to me about their prostate issues and anything to do with that at all. So again, like Fiona has her ambassadors, we have team leaders. So we need, for me, it's been about making sure, and I always think, well, actually, if someone doesn't like me, who are they going to talk to? Or if they're uncomfortable talking about this topic, like prostate issues, you know, if they don't want to talk to a woman about that, who can they talk to? So it's again about picking appropriate people. So I went to my team and I said, I think we have an issue with someone. Something he'd said in passing. I think we have an issue with someone with prostate who doesn't want to talk to me. Who can be more appropriate for that? And one of the gentlemen that we also employ put his hand up. And I said, well, okay, how are we going to deal with that without you just walking up to him and saying, Emma says you might have an issue with your prostate, because that's not appropriate at all. So again, it's looking at that wider picture. And I think that we should all be doing that irrespective of size. And I think you might get called different things, but ultimately it's the same issues that we are facing. It's just the case of scale and how we use terminology. It's all communication. That's what I think. Did that answer the question? I think so.
I think that more than answered the question, Emma. Thank you so much. I wish we had another half an hour or maybe even an hour. I'm another Welshman, so you've got two Scottish people and two Welsh people. This could go on all day, and I'm sure people would see the value in it, but unfortunately we've timed out. So I'd just like to pay tribute to you again. Thank you so much, all of you, for taking part. I hope the people who attended found some value in this. I'm sure they will have. And all that remains for me to say is any further questions that got asked and not answered, we'll endeavour to answer them directly after this particular session. And we also look forward to welcoming you to the next Being Well Together webinar, which will be in November, and full details of that will be on the website shortly. So thank you, everybody. I hope November's webinar is as good as this one. We had a record attendance, I believe. So thanks all of you who are involved with it, and we will see you next time. So take care. Thank you.